I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. You know, that famous line from the classic film Forrest Gump kind of sprung to mind for me when considering the professional history, career, and livelihood of today's guest. And spoiler alert, he's a wildly successful podcaster of a show that, get this, secures over 1.6 million monthly downloads. However, his path to this point has been filled with both unique experiences and circumstance. And take the fact that it all started with him selling an unrelated biz back in 2007 and deciding to travel the world. And boy did he travel, as you'll soon find out. He's been everywhere on this planet, in many cases multiple times. In doing so, he leveraged those experiences and combined his skills in writing to launch one of the most widely read travel blogs of all time. However, things didn't stop there. No. He went on to earn himself multiple prestigious awards in photography. But when COVID hit, everything changed. And that's kind of where we're going to pick up his story. You're in for a treat. This episode is all about diving into our guest's present track, which is that of a professional podcaster. You'll hear about what such a career and life is like from a true pro, including things like scheduling, day in the life, challenges, rewards, and a bunch more. So without further ado, let me more formally introduce him to you, and we can launch into this episode. Gary Arndt is a pioneering travel photographer and storyteller from Wisconsin who famously sold his business in 2007 to pursue his dream of traveling the world. And over the years, he's become a prominent figure in the travel industry, documenting his experiences on his blog, Everything Everywhere, which grew to be one of the most popular travel blogs of its time. His photography has earned him numerous accolades, including the Society of American Travel Writers, SATW, and North American Travel Journalists Association Travel Photographer of the Year awards, distinguishing him as one of the most acclaimed travel photographers of his generation. Now, in 2020, Gary channeled his passion for storytelling into launching the Everything Everywhere Daily Podcast, a show that quickly gained traction for its captivating, bite-sized episodes on history, science, and fascinating facts from around the world. And today, Everything Everywhere Daily attracts over 1.6 million monthly downloads, solidifying Gary's reputation as a top-tier podcaster and an influential voice in travel and education. So with all of this noted, I'd love to welcome you to my conversation with Gary Arndt. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Gary?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just speaking briefly, before we got started here, and really enjoy your podcast, Everything Everywhere Daily. And I'm excited to learn a little bit more about that, but also introduce it to, future listeners potentially as well here while diving into your work. Speaking of which, I do have this first segment lined up. It's something called Coloring Wikipedia. And it's a segment I just read off a definition of something related to what the guest is all about. Surprise, surprise, I have you down here for podcasting. So let me just read that off and then perhaps you could comment after. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So here we go. Podcasting. Podcasting is a preparation and distribution of audio or video files using RSS feeds to the devices of subscribed users. A podcast series usually features one or more recurring hosts engaged in a discussion about a particular topic or current event. Discussion and content within a podcast can range from carefully scripted to completely improvised. Now, of course, we're not breaking any new ground here. I think everyone, and their brother knows what a podcast is at this point. But the purpose of sort of reading that off is to examine it from a different perspective, to color it, if you will. So I'd love to get your take on that. I mean, is there anything that definition in its essence is missing based off of your experiences?
It's not so much that it's missing, but there's a part of it that I think a lot of people may overlook. And that is the term that was in there, RSS. RSS stands for really simple syndication. And it used to be a bigger deal. People would have RSS readers for websites. I still use an RSS reader, been using it ever since it was developed for almost 20 years now. But that is what distinguishes a podcast from, say, a YouTube channel or a YouTube video. YouTube controls everything. They can completely kick you off the service if they want. They can throttle who sees it. There's an algorithm. They have winners and losers. RSS doesn't work that way. And that is the fundamental difference. And a lot of people say, well, I listen to podcasts on YouTube. No, you don't. You listen to YouTube videos on YouTube. Now, a podcast may repurpose something on YouTube. That's done quite a bit. Joe Rogan, for example. And they think like, well, and I understand the confusion and the use of the term, but that is the thing that really defines a podcast. And one of the reasons I do podcasting is that it is not subject to any algorithms by any social media company, by any search company. And while a lot of people do listen to podcasts on places like Apple and Spotify, there's a limit to the control that they have with regards to algorithms. If you want to listen to a podcast, you can listen to it directly from an RSS feeder. You can do it on a website, however you want.
Yeah, I really like that insight there. It's a very clear distinction, the way that you just laid it out there. And I think that whether people know or not, I think that maybe is part of the appeal for a lot of individuals who seek out this option of putting their ideas or thoughts or stories into the world is just that. They're not held captive by, like you said, some of these platforms such as a YouTube, which these algorithms do tend to control, and always shifting and changing. But podcasting, again, the way that you just laid it out there, feels a little bit more pure in that sense. Like if your content is good, it's going to hit. If it's not, well, okay, it's on you rather than something else. So,
well, it takes time as well. So you could be popular overnight on YouTube. I've seen this happen where channels have, in a span of maybe 6 months, gotten 1 million subscribers. Unless you were a celebrity beforehand and had some sort of audience you're bringing to the table, that is probably not going to happen with a podcast. It's going to take time to build an audience. So that's the downside. The upside is once you have it, it's probably not going to disappear overnight like it can on YouTube or something else when they change their algorithm, which they always do.
Yeah, I'd love that insight right out of the gate here. This also might be an opportune time to learn a little bit more about you. I certainly, introduce listeners off the top here, but maybe you could describe a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Well, I'm probably best known. Well, before I started podcasting, I traveled around the world for 13 years. I sold my home in 2007. Thought I'd travel around the world for a year. That turned into more than a decade. And that was eventually, and I traveled extensively. I've been to over 200 countries and territories. I've been to every U.S. state twice, every U.S. territory, every province in Canada 3 times, every state in South Africa, Germany, Australia. So it's not just that I'm visiting countries, but I'm doing a lot within those countries. I became pretty well known as a travel photographer. I was named Travel Photographer of the Year 3 times in North America, 2013, 14, and 15. And when the pandemic hit, all of that ended really suddenly. In like a 2-week period of time in March of 2020, everything shut down and the travel industry went from trillions of dollars to almost zero overnight. And it had a huge impact on me. I'd say 95% of my income vanished. And it also put me in a position where I really needed to pivot to something else, which I had been thinking of doing anyhow, because there were a lot of problems precisely with this problem of algorithms that force everyone to create the same kind of content if they want to be successful. And the thing I'd always enjoyed doing was podcasting. And so I made a shift from travel content to something that I consider travel adjacent, which is history. Because a lot of the reason I traveled was to visit historical sites and to learn. And so I launched the show on July 1st of 2020, and I've been going ever since. It's a daily show. And when I'm done talking to you, I'm going to start working on episode number 1605.
There you go. There you go. Wow. Yeah, certainly impressive. And what's interesting to me is how some of those like dots along that journey ultimately connect up. And I think for younger listeners, I think that's a key point. Is a lot of your formative experiences, while in the moment you might not recognize that they are leading up to something, but they can, especially through a lot of reflection. I'm guessing for you at different points, as you're traveling through these countries, as you're understanding more about the purpose of why you're doing that. And as you just mentioned, you enjoy history, you're exploring that further. It probably struck you, okay, well, maybe there is an option for putting, this content and my ideas into the world, and that would be in the form of something such as podcasting. And again, it comes from this form of reflection and sort of connecting up these various interests, I suppose. Is that accurate? Is that a good way of looking at it as it applies to you?
Yeah, I mean, when I started traveling, I just wanted to travel. But having done it for so long, I kind of realized, I should say, even when I did this, I realized, okay, the money I spend doing this is actually kind of an investment because all these experiences I'm going to have can never be repossessed.
Yeah.
If you buy a house or a car, it could burn to the ground, you could crash, it could be taken, something could happen. Your experiences never can be taken, right? So I didn't realize at the time that all the experiences I had traveling could be put to use to something like I'm doing now, but it turned out to be the perfect training ground for it, I suppose, where I was able to, on top of all the other things I'd done in my life, both education and work-wise, to give me the experiences to do a show like this. And I've often said, I think there are more people than me out there who could do a show like mine, but most of those people probably never would.
Yeah.
Because it's just way too much work.
Which kind of leads me into this next question here and yet another segment, A Day in the Life. What makes your show interesting is the daily nature of it. I mean, I don't have any stats off the top of my head here that would indicate that is out of the norm, but certainly, I mean, most podcasts, as we know, are coming out.
It is out of the norm.
It is out of the norm.
Your average podcast is going to be a weekly podcast with some more producing less frequently than that. There are very few daily shows, and I don't have any numbers, but it could be. I know someone who has a data set that could probably figure it out. And it's not easy. When I started this, everybody said I was crazy. It's like, this is a great idea, but you're eventually going to get burned out because people that have tried doing daily podcasts always give up eventually. And most people who do a daily podcast, they do something like 5 minutes and they record all of them at once or an entire week's worth at once. And that's not what I'm doing at all. I'm writing a 2,000 word term paper every day.
Yeah. I mean, in listening to your podcast, the level of detail and insight that you're providing there, this isn't something that you're going to just sort of like, get done in 5-10 minutes. This is something that's all consuming. I could clearly.
No, it takes hours.
Yeah.
But, but at the same token, people go to work 8 hours a day all over the world or more. So it's not like putting in that much time is that crazy. It's a job. And my job is putting together a show every day. Yeah. And it takes about that much time. It may take anywhere, I would say on average, 4 to 6 hours to put together, to write up a show. There's a lot of kind of preliminary research before that where I get comfortable with the topic. I'll think about it quite a bit. But yeah, that's a work day. And so it's not really any different.
Yeah. And I suppose too, I mean, once you have your rhythm and routine and you structure it down into these bite-sized parts of your day and tasks, I suppose, leading up to, ultimately publishing an episode, that's kind of the flow. So really quickly, I mean, this segment, Day in the Life, what would it look like? You just sort of alluded to it there.
I normally wake up at 10 or 11 in the morning, and you'll see why. I do the things that I have to do to communicate with other people during the day, during the workday. I always, if I have an interview like this or something, I always schedule it for the afternoon because I'm waking up late. And then I will usually in the evening set about to start writing the show. So I have not begun on tomorrow's show yet. And we're recording this at in 3 in the afternoon, my time. And then I'll usually end up finishing the show. Maybe I'll watch a movie while I'm writing it. I'll finish it at somewhere between 2 to 4 in the morning. I record it. I go to bed, start again the next day.
There you go. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And how long has the show been going for? I mean, how long has that routine been in place for now?
4.5 years.
4.5 years. There you go.
So it's a very different life than what I was doing when I was traveling. I have not been out of the country since I started the show.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a question later on about how this sort of impacts your life, but I can certainly, I can guess just off the top of my head right here and just, the way you just spelled things out. But we'll get to that later on here. I do want to shift yet into another segment here, a Q&A discovery. Now, I mean, at this point, podcasting itself is officially a thing. I mean, stats would certainly indicate this. There's over 546 million podcast listeners worldwide, according to the stats that I dug up at the time of this recording. 47% of the population 12 and over listen to a podcast at least once a month. And worldwide ad expenditure is looking to go over $4.2 billion, again, at the time of this recording. So it's no wonder that everyone and their brother is starting a podcast these days. Now, it is one thing to start a podcast. I mean, that can be a bit of an endeavor, but it's another to achieve what you're hitting right now. And what I'm after here, what I'm driving at in this question is, what do you think it is that goes into the success that you're having as opposed to others who maybe aren't achieving?
I made the decision early on to not do an interview show because there's a lot of interview podcasts. That is both easier and harder. The biggest problem with doing an interview show is, of course, scheduling. Because we had this scheduled yesterday and I ended up missing it. And I've done interview shows before, and that's always a constant thing. Finding guests can be a problem. But by the same token, you just have a conversation, right? So the actual, it's which part is more difficult. And then the editing part is usually more difficult when you're doing an interview because you have two different people talking. There's ums and ahs and breaks and things like that. Maybe swear words you got to take out. Doing a monologue show like I do is trivial to record. Like I just sit down, I start talking until I flub up. I just move it back to that point and start again. And by the time I'm done, I'm done. So it takes me about 20 minutes to record a 10-minute show. The challenging part is the upfront part, and that's the research. And so what I just basically made a show that was the show I wanted to listen to. And I've had other ideas for podcasts, but they all stem from that point. What would I be interested in? Because if I'm interested in it, then I think someone else might be interested in it too. And you also have to have a good format. A lot of people start a podcast and it's just, well, I like talking about this stuff. And that usually is not a good enough basis for something. You need to have a format that's a little something more. And I think with mine, it's evergreen content that is good forever. I have people listening to my very first episode still, 4.5 years ago, and it was about the Byzantine Empire. I don't think that's going to be changing anytime soon. That'll be good in 10 years. So I think making evergreen content, doing a monologue scripted show is something that very few shows do, certainly on a daily basis, sets the show apart and allows me to do something that few other people do.
As far as engagement, are you finding ways of engaging with a lot of your listeners as well to deepen those community sort of relations as well, to keep them engaged with the content? Or
yeah, I have a Facebook group that's pretty active, a Discord server. Don't really want to do much more than that. I do a monthly Q&A episode at the start of every month. I just posted my call for questions today. And yeah, I get a lot of feedback. I get people that send me requests for weird stuff. This one guy, he listens to the show with his girlfriend, and he wanted to do a marriage proposal. So he wanted me to record something special that he would then play. So it sounded like a regular episode, but then put something in the middle of the episode directly for her that she would hear. So yeah, I get a lot of that kind of stuff. Well, I shouldn't say a lot of that kind of stuff, but that was unique. But requests and things like that from people.
Yeah. Well, that's fun. Well, it sounds like to me, I mean, there's certainly a bit of strategy involved in all that you do and how you structure the show and some strategic decisions as far as like how you went about it, making sure that it is evergreen content, that the stuff is going to last, but also too, like a lot of intuition and feeling as well, as you'd mentioned, like this is something that you yourself would like to listen to if it was available. So I like that blend there. And I think it kind of speaks to that point of, if you are entertaining this notion, these are some of the things that you would certainly need to do. And I appreciate that insight there. Now, I do want to shift over to another question here. In researching for this talk, I did come across a post of yours on LinkedIn. And it was a bit of a post where you were lamenting, the fact that despite having, the amount of success that you and your podcast has, that sometimes, the advertisers, at least within travel and education-based industries, it hasn't been exactly the easiest to secure that type of funding for the show consistently. And I think this is a bit of a reality check for those who are interested in professionally podcasting. I'd love to get your insight on that, because from the outside looking in, the stats that I read off, a question earlier, it would seem that the industry is fully developed and it's ready, for individuals who are talented, such as yourself. Yet this would indicate that something different. Love to get your thoughts.
The industry is not super fully developed at this point. You're not seeing a lot of branding type advertisements. A lot of what you see on podcasts are call to action type things. Use this coupon code now to get such and such, right? Not drink Coca-Cola, where it's just the kind of things you might see on television, you're not necessarily seeing on a podcast yet. And in the case of travel, because I work so extensively with the travel and tourism industry, I'm very familiar with what they do. And they've always been several years behind the curve on everything. They were very slow to recognize the internet as a place where people got information, because they were still so attached to print magazines and newspapers, and then they eventually died. And now they're still stuck as if it's, 2017 or something, focused on Instagram and stuff like that. And with podcasting, like I tell you, like my exposure on a podcast in terms of attention, I actually figured out once, if you look at the amount of time people go to my website based on the number of visits versus the average amount of time spent, which is like 45 seconds, the amount of time people were spending per month on the podcast versus the website was roughly 10,000 times greater than what I had before. And on social media, you're scrolling and you spend maybe 5 seconds looking at something. Most people can't tell you the last 10 things they liked on social media.
Yeah.
It's all ephemeral.
Yeah.
They don't remember it. And so I don't know. In some ways, because I have a background in travel and tourism, I kind of wanted to work with a lot of these people. I think there's a lot I could do creatively in terms of them sponsoring episodes to talk about their country. It's been talking to a wall. And so I've kind of just thrown up my hands and like, when you're ready, I'm prepared to talk, but I'm not going to waste a lot of time and effort pursuing it.
Yeah. I hear you on that. I mean, are you optimistic that this is going to come about? Is just a time-based issue that eventually they're going to get their act together and realize?
I think so, but I don't require them for my success anymore. So
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, podcasting, I would certainly agree as well. I mean, it's one of the most intimate forms of content that's available out there. I mean, I once had a guest on this program, Latif Nasser, who's the host of the program Radio Lab, which is a major hit within the U.S. And the way he described it, I was asking him a question about like, why do you think podcasting does resonate with so many people? And his response was something along the lines of, literally, you have a person's voice in your head. And it doesn't get much more intimate than that. As for advertisers, you would assume that would be a golden opportunity, in terms of tapping into that. And in some spaces that is occurring, I guess within travel, not just yet, but again, like you would just think that would be a natural fit for.
There are many industries where the number one goal of people who work in those industries is to not be fired. And the way you don't be fired is you do whatever was done before, because you can always point back regardless of how it performs and say, well, we just did what we've always done. You can't blame me for that. Whereas if you were to do something smaller and different, that's going to get attention. People are going to look at that. They're going to scrutinize it more. So in the case of advertising, a travel brand could spend $1 million on CNN. But if you spend $10,000 on podcasting, that is going to get more attention than spending the $1 million will. So why would you risk that? And that's kind of where we're at. I've seen it before. As to whether they'll come around, who knows? I like to think eventually everybody will. There's been a lot more attention given to podcast in the last month. With the recent presidential election, there's been all this talk about how it was the podcast election, and people were looking at the data of how bigger the audiences were than like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and it's substantial. Like it's substantially larger. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. They think of these legacy media institutions as being something special, and this is where you must be. But in reality, unless you're over 70, most people have moved on and they consume the vast majority of their content online, and they are not watching these legacy media institutions.
Yeah. Well, I think I just saw something on social media in regards to what you're just referring to right here. And, politics aside, I certainly don't want to get into that. That's not what this podcast is about. But it was something coming out of Trump's office, or was his team mentioning that perhaps once he takes power, I guess I am dating this podcast now, he's not fully in office just yet. But he did mention that perhaps it would be a good idea to have influential podcasters at some of his pressers, as opposed to some of these legacy media companies that we're all familiar with. And I think it's speaking to that point that you're raising there, that the intimacy of the medium that they offer does reach people in a different way. And again, politics aside, I think it speaks to this point.
I had to deal with this for years in travel media. So you had big travel magazines like Condé Nast Traveler, Travel and Leisure, National Geographic Traveler. You had most major newspapers in the country had travel sections. And I was looked down on by all the editors of these places and these writers that wrote for these prestigious publications. And they felt that, the more prestigious the publication you write for, the more prestigious you are. And if you're a blogger, well, you're not even on the totem pole, right? You're not at the bottom of the totem pole. You're not even on it because no writer would do that. And then over time, they all lost their jobs because they got laid off, and they would have come to me asking me, "Well, how does this blogging thing work?" And you win by survival. The mammals didn't beat the dinosaurs because they got bigger than the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs just died, and so the rats and the mice managed to survive and then eventually become the elephants. And the same's true with this. So, yeah, why wouldn't you have someone with a very popular YouTube channel at a press conference? Why wouldn't you? And the people in legacy media are going to have a conniption because, like, no, we're the serious journalists. We are the ones on this network and work for these publications. You're just amateurs. But at the end of the day, who cares? Because people are actually watching them, and they're not amateurs. They're actually making more money than you.
There you go. It's an interesting time, no doubt. Now, to this point, I feel as though we've definitely addressed some of the challenges of being within this world, especially from a professional sense of podcasting. But I'd like to shift on over towards some of the rewards that you get from the work itself, professionally or personally. What would you say to that?
Dude, I get to read and write about whatever I want. That's my job. The name of my podcast is literally Everything, Everywhere. So there are no limits to where I can go in terms of what I want to do an episode about. And that's extremely liberating. I can't think of anything else I would rather be doing. I mean, this is a pretty great job.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, I can certainly understand and attest to that point as well. Like you're engaged with individuals or with content in certain cases here that are driving you, that you have a passion for, and you're constantly learning and pushing yourself forward. Those are some of the experiences that I'm, part of that really charge me up. And I can see that, how that would be a big part of, what you do as well. As far as, the work changing you as a person, maybe that could come down to like your scheduling and how you, run your days or whatnot, or even just how you philosophically look at the world. In what ways has podcasting affected you in that sense?
Well, it's cut down on my travel, that's for certain. I used to go to conferences a lot. I've basically cut them all out.
Is that a good thing for you, or is that something that you kind of miss?
It's a thing. It's not a function of like not affording to go. That's not a problem anymore. It's the time that for me to take a week out of my schedule, I need to see some benefit of going. And so I used to go to a lot of travel events. There was just one in Istanbul that I missed purposefully because I couldn't take that much time off. I didn't know what the benefit was going to be, and which means I travel even less than what I was doing before. So that's the biggest change to my life, I think.
Yeah. And like based off of all that you shared to this point, I mean, that from the outside looking in would seemingly be a bit of a challenge for you, because like that's something that brought joy to you. But I guess you're exploring the world in a different way through your podcast and through your research. No,
I kind of got burned out towards the end. I mean, I was on the road a very long time, and people often say, "Oh, you must really want to get traveling again." And I often say, I'm good. I've traveled more than pretty much any human on Earth. There are a handful of people that, have traveled more than me, but there aren't many. And I'm pretty good for now. I'll travel again, but right now I've caught the tiger by the tail, and I want to see this through to completion. And so this is what I'm going to be doing for a while, I think.
Okay, fair. All right. Well, we are moving along at a pretty nice pace here, and I have this other segment, a water cooler story segment. And here I just ask, guests to indulge listeners with a story related to their work. And I'm quite keen to hear what you have for us today, Gary.
In terms of this particular podcast, there aren't a whole lot of stories because I just wake up, sit in my, apartment, record the show. But I was doing a podcast before this one. It was called This Week in Travel. We started it in 2009. We did it through the pandemic because we lost things to talk about. And it was me and two other co-hosts, and we'd have a rotating guest on the show and talk about whatever was happening in the world of travel. And while this was going on, this is right in the middle of when I was traveling extensively. So I would often call into the show from all sorts of different places. I literally tried to do it on a ship in Antarctica, but the internet wasn't that good at that time. I could probably do it now. I remember waking up at 3 a.m. to do it in Fiji in the middle of the night. And probably one of my best stories is I was going to be visiting these salt caverns. It's a World Heritage Site outside of Krakow, Poland, right when we were going to be recording. And I said, well, I probably can't join the show. But I'm in the salt mine while the podcast is being recorded, and I'm a mile under the earth in the gift shop. And I went and looked at I had an iPod Touch. It wasn't even a phone. And I saw they had a Wi-Fi signal. So we at the time we were recording on Skype. So I call into the show on Skype as it's going.
No way.
And I'm like, guys, guess where I am? I'm a mile beneath the surface of the earth. Just wanted to call in, check in, say hi, because I don't think anyone has ever recorded a podcast like this before. Blah, blah, blah. So I'm on for 5 minutes. We talk, and then I leave again. One of the co-hosts for the show forgot to hit record, and it was all lost.
No.
So,
oh no, that's a heartbreaking story. That's heartbreaking.
My big historical moment in podcasting.
Oh no.
Completely gone.
Oh no. All right. Well, I appreciate you sharing that all the same. Geez. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you have about a billion stories linked up to your travels and whatnot, but yeah, trying to tie them into the podcasting world could be a bit of a challenge. And that one right there sounds golden, or it's still a good story, but yeah, I can see the frustration or potential frustration aligned with that one for sure. Okay, well, we are rounding the bend into this very last segment, a crystal ball segment. As the name implies, we're looking towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And within the world of podcasting, much like a lot of other industries right now, technology is ruling the roost in a lot of different ways. It's constantly evolving. AI in particular is shifting and changing things around. I'd love to get your take on that. I mean, in what ways is technology affecting the way that you go about your work, and in what ways do you think it could, present further change moving forward?
I mean, everything I do is pretty much technology. The one question I often get is like, oh, has AI affected your show? Like, can you just have it write your show? And the quick answer to that is no, absolutely not. Just for the heck of it, I've tried it, and it does not work. It does not sound natural. It doesn't sound like me, I should say, because my episodes are very research intensive. A lot of the data is often wrong, so you have to recheck everything. I have found limited use for it. If I have a very big, complex topic and I need to narrow it down to something digestible for a 10-minute show, I can do a pretty good job of that. So there's a show I've been working on. I haven't recorded it yet, where I want to go over like the ancient religions, like Egypt, Rome, Greece, their gods, their pantheon, and religious practices. And that's a big topic. So I've used that to kind of like pare it down, like, what are the minor gods? What are their beliefs? Stuff like that. And that was helpful. But even then, you still have to go and actually do the legwork to research a lot of stuff. Beyond that, I don't know what technology. We got microphones. They're good. There are smaller ones you could travel with, I guess. In theory, I could do my entire operation on the road with a laptop and some other things. I don't know how technology is changing. Podcasting has just been growing steadily. Every so often you see a new flash in the pan social site, for example. Facebook launched Threads, and everyone had to be on Threads, and now it's Blue Sky. Everyone's got to be on Blue Sky. And this has happened before with Ello, what was it, Google Plus. These things come and go. Podcast just keeps increasing every year. slowly and steadily for 20 years. It just keeps going up when you look at the data. And this means that it's really here to stay. It's not a flash in the pan. And I think there's a lot of room to grow for the industry as well as for myself. And I just want to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you see it going in your estimation? Obviously growing, you just sort of spelled that out there, but in what ways do you think it's going to expand or change or?
A lot of the big companies like YouTube and Spotify are trying to get people to move to video. And while I'm not against video, they're trying to push people to video because they can control it. It's easier to control video than audio because it's more bandwidth intensive and it requires a lot more in terms of production, in terms of time and money than audio does. And what a lot of people forget is that one of the reasons people listen to audio podcasts is because you can listen to it in places you can't watch video. When you're driving a car, when you're going for a walk, when you're working or doing the laundry or working out or places like that, podcasting uniquely fills in a space where you can't really consume any other media. And for that reason, it's not going away. And this whole pivot to video thing completely ignores that. And it ignores the fact that because you consume podcasts in these places, the CPM rates and the advertising for audio podcasts tends to be much larger than for video. It's just that the video companies like YouTube can take a bigger cut, which is why they want people to move there because they make more money, not you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. From that financial perspective as well, and we've already touched upon this to this point, the advertising expenditure and trying to make a living off of that. Do you see further possibilities from a professional standpoint of, making it within the world of podcasting if you're starting out? Like, somebody who might just assume that the only way to do that is through advertising, through those funds. Are there other ways do you see, coming down the pipeline here that could open things up further as podcasting, the medium itself, continues to grow?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to make money off anything, you're selling something. You're either selling someone else's product or you're selling your own. Your own could be a product, literally you're selling, or consulting services. A lot of people do very well and they use their podcast as a marketing channel for some other business. It could be the podcast itself where people have to sign up for a membership or a subscription and they just pay for the podcast. And then, of course, there's advertising. So there's different ways to do it. It isn't just advertising. In fact, advertising in some respects might be the worst.
Something I didn't ask earlier. I mean, what is your model? I mean, what if
it's advertising, but I'm able to get away with it because I got a really big audience. And so it scales very well, which is what I was going to say. But I think it's also going to be like anything else. I've had people say, well, what's the median podcaster make? And the answer is zero. And the answer is, what does the median basketball player make? Well, the median basketball player is some dude playing for a rec league. That's the median basketball player. What does the median guitar player play? He's some guy who plays at his house. And, the idea that they're going to monetize that unless they're at a level of, Eddie Van Halen or LeBron James is kind of silly. And podcasting is going to be no different than anything else. Any other type of performance or, medium where you have people pay attention. You're fundamentally monetizing an audience. You need to be able to get an audience. And if you can do that, then you might be able to make a living. And if you can't, then you probably won't.
There we go. One final question here. Any advice, words of wisdom that you'd be giving to somebody who is interested in this?
If you're going to do it, take it seriously. The vast majority of podcasts never make it to episode 3. People are like, oh, yeah, I'll start a podcast. And it's just kind of a lark and they do it and then it never goes anywhere. That's the vast majority of podcasts. They're non-existent. You hear these numbers like there's millions of podcasts. Well, it's millions of that. Non-serious attempts. So if you want to take this real serious, you're going to have to make it a priority because a lot of people, they start it and then they got other things in their lives and then something comes up and then what gets cut, the podcast, and then they don't go back to it and then it dies. So you're going to have to make it a priority and you're going to have to give it at least like 18 to 24 months. And most people don't do that. They give up after a while. It's like, well, this isn't going anywhere. It's just worth my time. And I've had periods like that and I just plowed through. You hit a plateau and then you eventually start to see things take off again. And unless you have that, then I don't think you're going to find success.
Well, on that note, I think this might be a nice point to draw this conversation to a close here. But Gary, I've really enjoyed this from start to finish. I can't believe we've blown through all the questions I'd prepared here for you. And yeah, thanks again for taking some time and joining the program. It's been a true pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Gary and his work, you can do so via LinkedIn. You can also check out his Everything Everywhere Daily podcast website, as well as access those episodes wherever you find your podcasts. And for reference, all of this information, including the links, will be in the show notes. And hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share to show further support. You can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. Lastly, as I mentioned off the top, head on over to YouTube. I do have that channel which hosts highlights from these audio recordings. And if you do make it over there, I'd love a like, a subscribe, heck, even a comment. Let me know what you think of the show. And finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life, as you could literally be one listen away from finding your dream job. I'm Christopher Schoenwald, your host, and until next time, don't settle for less. Find the career that you were born for.